Hey guys, just wanted to jump in before the episode got rolling here. If you listen to the second half of this episode, you'll hear me announce a new partner for the Northern Hunter. And since this recording, I've gotten more details. So that partner is a new company called Bag Tech. And we're all very excited to bring this one to you guys. They are a company in the lower 48 with 30 years of combined experience between Alaska and Montana. And this product, their flagship product, which is called the drag bag system, has been in testing for roughly 6 years between those two environments. Now, what this does, it's basically a lightweight, fold-up solution to needing to bring, say, like an otter sled or something like that on your hunt. You can throw your pack in it if you want, but what it's really designed for is to have for dragging animals. Think caribou hunting or deer down in Southeast or Kodiak. These are made of some of the toughest tarping material available. We're going to have the owners on at some point to talk about it in greater detail, but it comes with a full harness and everything you need to hook up to this thing and drag stuff out of the woods. It's a really cool system. We're all super excited to be using them in the field, and I hope you guys are too. If you would like to check those out, go to bagtech.org and check out all 3 sizes that they have in offerings right now. These are available for pre-order, but if you use the code TheNorthernHunter at checkout, you will get a discount. Super excited to be partnering with these guys. It's a great system, and I think it's going to be a great addition to a lot of hunters' kit here in the state of Alaska. So go check them out, and let's get into the show. Hope you guys enjoy. You're listening to the Northern Hunter Podcast, home of all things hunting, fishing, and outdoors in Alaska. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. I hope everybody's had a very successful August so far. If you're listening to us in Alaska, a lot has been going on the last month. We've got sheep and caribou all going on. So hopefully you all have had great success. And if you did, definitely write into the show. Send us some pictures. We'd love to see it. I've got Chris as my co-host for this episode. And we're sitting down with Carl Roberts once again. Thank you so much for joining us again this evening.
I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited you're here too. This episode, we're going to be covering, I think this one comes out on what, the 28th? 20, something like that?
Just
somewhere.
In time?
I don't know. My calendar's not working on my laptop, but somewhere, it's like the week before September 1st, which is...
Just in time.
Just in time for moose. So, we're going to be touching on some stuff. If you have been listening to the podcast for a while, you know we did a lot of moose hunting episodes last fall, both leading into the season and during the season. We had a really great Q&A episode, actually, where people wrote in and asked a lot of questions. We've had a few questions asked this year that we'll touch on in this episode. But the one I'm really wanting to dive into here is more the science of calling, because that is one thing we didn't touch on in extreme detail last fall. And I feel like it's something a lot of people have the biggest questions on, and this is true of almost any, bigger deer species, whether it's elk and whatnot, or really, caribou you can't call a caribou in that I know of. I'm sure somebody can somewhere. Somebody's probably figured it out. I would love to see that, but moose is a big one that people call. So,
you ever heard anyone calling caribou?
I was going to say, you look like you're thinking over there.
Pondering, and no, I don't know of any caribou calls. I don't even know that they make too much noise.
All I've ever heard them do is grunt. Just kind of like a grunt, like weird.
What's that sound, Carl, when you're like, you can hear them from a distance and it's like super loud when you're like near a herd? Is it them chewing, or what is that?
I don't know.
Weird. You know what I'm talking about?
It's like James? A low frequency, almost like it's not a rumble, but it's a low frequency.
Like, you could several hundred yards off, you can hear it sometimes. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. It's just real low frequency. I don't know. Maybe it's all their digestion. Who knows?
I've always wondered what that is.
Just syncing up together.
I've actually heard that before I've seen them.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. I have no idea what it would be.
I've
though.
mentioned to a
Like-
couple of people, and they're like, "Dude, what are you talking about?"
No, there's other things you can do for caribou. You know, there's like you can kind of entice them with something shiny, and they can come to you and whatnot. But ultimately, yeah, if anybody does know of anybody that's figured out a sound that makes caribou come towards you, I would love to hear about that. But I'm going to go ahead and say it probably doesn't exist. But moose, on the other hand, are extremely receptive, given the time of year and given the right call. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And that's why we're doing a double feature of Mr. Carl Roberts this month, is because if anybody hasn't guessed already, when we have brought up during our other discussions on episodes that you're not here, Carl, that we have to consult with the Knight of the Round Table. That was to break the suspense there. That's Carl. And the reason we've given you that nickname is because it seems like you've just got experience with everything there is Alaskan, at least that I'm curious about and that the listeners are curious about. So
I've had a lot of opportunity to do a lot of different things here, that's for sure. And some of it's been fun, some of it's kind of miserable, but yeah, I mean,
that pretty much well describes Alaska.
but yeah, I mean, pretty much moose, black bear, all of it. And
Mhm.
probably more actual fish and game work with moose than any other thing, and a lot of survey work, quite a few captures, chemical immobilization stuff.
Would you call it in one of the previous episodes abductions?
That's right.
Yeah, abductions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you definitely kind of embody like everything that we talk about here on the show, as far as like your waterfowl knowledge, fishing knowledge, big game knowledge, and all of that. So I just want to say thank you for your willingness to share all that with us and all of our listeners and everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things you kind of learn, and I've learned a lot from a lot of people, and pass it along and help other folks do it. The way to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what this whole thing is about. So you touched a couple details there of like the kind of stuff you did with Fish and Game. What are some kind of stories and more of like what you guys were actually doing
Well, I
as
mean,
far as the moose go?
as far as moose go, most of it was post hunting season surveys where we would, fly around in a Super Cub for usually out, I don't know, 40 to 50 minutes, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
And you cover, depends on how far north you are, but about 4 to 5 minutes per square mile. So, somewhere in that range, depending on how many moose are in there. And
Okay.
you're just flying a grid and searching and kind of trying to find every moose that's out there.
Yeah.
And I mean, we know we miss a few. We've done some citability correction or something similar where you're double checking, or you have somebody double checking to see if you saw that moose, things like that.
Gotcha.
With callers out there, and
And you're just looking for basically a post hunt census take at that point.
yeah, I mean, if you do them in the fall, you can categorize your bulls. You've got large bulls, medium bulls, small bulls, and then like spike fork, and then cows with calves, twins, so forth, and you can get a kind of a population number off of that, at least for the area you're working on. And without going too far down the statistics, the more you do, the better confidence you have in it. But so yeah, I mean, we would do that and kind of flew all over. I've flown everywhere from right along the Canadian border, all the way out in western Alaska, get closer to Nome, and all the way up north. Flew everything south of the kind of the Brooks Range, and I even did a few moose surveys down out of Glen Ellen one year.
Oh, really? Okay.
So kind of all over the state, and some areas see intensive management and things like that, and so they
Sure.
get a little more focus than other areas, and stuff that's accessible versus non-accessible. I mean, no matter what the number is, I guess in some cases there aren't the resources to manage it any other way than the way it is managed.
Right.
So those tend to kind of get lower priority in terms of survey money allocation and going places where there's maybe it's more access or, closer to town along the road system, someplace that had a bad winter, I mean, we've seen some of that and trying to make sure that we get a number of what's out there and how we manage it,
Yeah.
in the state. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the survey stuff. And then, putting callers out. Sometimes we'll do bulls. It's usually a rare thing to do bulls. I worked on a project where we were catching bulls about 100 miles south of here, and it was for a graduate student project, and they were looking at how moose respond to noise disturbance from ATVs during hunting season, pre-hunting
Oh,
season, some
gotcha.
stuff like that. But normally bulls are pretty boring. They don't tell you much as far as scientifically. You want information about the cows. You want to know where they're at, when they're, and then you can go check on those and see if they have calves and things like that. And so,
Right.
more often than not, it's primarily cow, captures or survey. I mean, let me take that back. It's primarily cows for capture work,
Mm-hmm.
even though that's not what people are interested in. And then, those surveys, you get your bull to cow ratios and kind of your management objectives. And,
So are you guys doing a lot of like health tests and stuff like that when you go out and capture cows and whatnot?
well, I mean, probably the majority of what we're doing is actually calves. We'll catch,
yeah.
and it depends. Sometimes you're catching them early, but most of what we're doing around the interior is looking at calf weights and comparing those across the state and different areas, and you're looking for how healthy they are, right? How much do they weigh?
Sure.
Things like that. And so it's kind of like it's a metric to use to see what the herd health is. If you're getting a lot of cows or a lot of calves that are light compared to someplace else, it might be food dependent, might be density, some kind of a density issue where you have too many moose and they're fighting over a little amount of food. And then in other places, it's you're looking at calf survival and seeing how many calves survive and when they're predated on. Are they predated on during the summer? Are they predated on when they're newborn calves in the early spring?
Sure.
More bear related predation, or is it a more adult or juvenile predation where it's maybe wolves or bears depending on the situation? But yeah,
Gotcha.
because bears are going to be the most effective at catching moose when they're newborn and immobile. And I mean, without going too far, we've talked about that when bears disappear during bear baiting.
Yep, that's what they're doing.
I think there's a high percentage of those bears that are out looking for moose calves. And a couple of the predator control programs have noticed that when you start removing bears, you do see a return in moose calves, and you see the yearling moose numbers go up drastically. So, now whether that's sustainable, that's a whole nother debate. But
sure, yeah, you're just kind of leveling the curve for just that 1 year.
Yeah. But yeah. So usually, we're kind of. I mean, the procedure we had was we were doing short yearlings, and they would be about 10 months old, just short of a year. And yeah, we would dart them, and then usually you'd run the cow off with the helicopter, and then it's kind of a race. You got to get to the calf before the cow gets back to the calf.
Sure.
And she'll hang up if you get there first, and then just kind of hold her ground and stay. But then we had a little aluminum tripod. We would use to come along in a scale and put them in a little bag and lift them up, weigh them, and then end up putting we would do like an ear tag or something like that, because the immobilization drugs are not good for consumption. So can't eat within so many days. Usually it was 45 days or 60 days, depending on what you were using. Especially close to town, where there's a chance that they might be hit by a vehicle and then they can't be salvaged for a charity or something like that. And
just to let the harvesters know that.
Right, if somebody hit it and then they called the troopers show up and they respond and there's this moose, they go dispatch it, and now they see this ear tag. it can't be consumed
Right.
if it was before such and such a day or whatever.
Gotcha.
And I mean, that's some of the reason that we don't or we didn't, when I worked Fish and Game, um, that's why we didn't immobilize moose in town. I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons, right? If it takes 10 minutes for that thing to lay down,
Mm-hmm.
it can go a long ways in 10 minutes through neighborhoods, down roads, all drugged
Sure.
up, and
Probably a higher likelihood of getting hit then. 'cause-
yeah, and then I mean, we chased one around in a playground at a school. Well, I
Oh,
can't
no
really be
kidding.
flinging drugs around on a school playground.
Slightly frowned upon.
And then so yeah, I mean that moose actually had it had been pulled out of the Chena River in town by some snow machiners,
Mm.
and then like we actually had a certain setup that we would use if we had to do something like that because it had a release so you could get the loop that you put around its neck off of it.
Oh, gotcha.
Well, the moose gets out of the river and takes off with 100 feet of like 3/8 inch rope wrapped around it, and dragging it through. I mean, and this went on for probably 4 or 5 months.
Didn't you say it got shorter and shorter?
It did get shorter and shorter. How much rope is there? Oh, probably 50 feet. And then it was 30 feet. And then it was, But,
Big frayed end.
yeah. And we were actually going to try using tasers and see if we could immobilize it enough to just run up and cut the,
Sure, yeah.
I mean, probably wouldn't be the best experience, but
I was gonna say I don't know if I'd want to play around with a tased moose.
it was going to be a run up, cut the rope and
Yeah.
run away. But, yeah, it's just too hard to get close.
Yeah.
I mean, to get that, in that range of something that, and I think at this point, like when we were doing this moose had been, harassed by us for weeks. I mean, it was probably 2 or 3 days a week we were driving around. I mean,
really?
probably knew the sound of the pickup truck and was started running whenever it heard that thing approaching. But yeah, we tried we tried getting up on somebody's deck and see if it had walked by and we could kind of get it from above, and it would
Mhm.
just peel out at the last second. And I mean, it was just it was difficult, but it eventually went away. And I think the rope probably rotted. I mean, and I think somebody said it had a calf because we saw it with like 6 feet of rope just hanging around its neck, and it was all just
Mangled.
worn out rope. But it had a calf with it, and that was the other reason is you start darting moose if they're pregnant, and you start having some major issues there, and
Right.
so it kind of wasn't worth it, at the end of the day. And there's a bunch of reasons, but yeah, biggest one is you run that probability of that moose running out into traffic and getting hit by a car, and it's not just a that could be a mortality on the
Oh
road.
yeah. Yeah. It's not just the moose's safety at that point.
Right.
Yeah, that's-
Right. And so dispatched quite a few moose. Had a few that were in different situations. Some that had been stuck in the ice for 2, 3, 4 days where they'd fallen through, and
Oh wow.
dispatched them and drug them out and took them to a charity.
Mhm.
Dispatched one off of Fairbanks International Airport.
Wow.
We were trying to herd this thing around, just like move it around, and of course they had welded all the gates shut because of security. They'd welded all the like peripheral gates shut, and it was right by one of them, and it was kind of in a funnel. It would have been an easy deal to just push it out, and they said no, and so we're out there trying to
the airport said no?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, because of regulation, they didn't want to do that, and it was welded shut. And anyway, and so we were trying to like herd this thing around and make it like a 90-degree turn, and then it would go here and go there, and it wanted to be in this spot because it hadn't been browsed. I mean, it's completely untouched willows that had been mowed like the year before, and so they were all like perfect. And
there's a reason it hadn't been browsed.
they wanted it gone, and it was a cow and a calf actually, and so we tried and finally they're like, hey, we got a plane that's trying to land, we got to make a decision, and just go ahead and shoot it. And so shot the cow, And then the calf, of course, ran right back to that hole. And they cut a hole in that gate. They'd actually went and cut that gate open after I did that. And then the calf ran right out of it. But, yeah. Yep. And then that moose walked right through one of the sides on the airport where they have all the small aircraft. And it's an automated gate. And it just walked right up to the gate. The gate opened up and I mean, it's not.
Well, don't mind if I do.
I mean, I guess it's not any different than. I don't know if we talked about that. That when the beaver went into Lowe's.
No.
Well, yeah, walked right in the front door of Lowe's.
I remember you telling me about this.
Got into work and phone's just ringing, and as soon as it quit ringing, it'd start ringing again, and it was the same number, and I'm like, all right, I'm finally going to answer this, even if it's early.
Interrupting my coffee.
And yeah, they're like, hey, we've got a beaver in our store in the lighting section at in Lowe's, and
What?
they put like a refrigerator box over the top of it, and
Oh my goodness.
and it was like bouncing, like off of the fixtures and and so I grabbed an action packer and went over there, and I remember like trying to figure this out, and I was like, hey, do you guys have any welding gloves? And they went and grabbed me a pair of like welding gloves off the shelf, and I kicked over the box, and the thing, like all of a sudden it's bright, and I grabbed it and threw it in the action packer, put the lid on it, and took it to the truck.
Oh my god!
And probably wasn't the best choice for transporting, because it had chewed a hole that was probably 4 or 5 inches in diameter. It was almost all the way out of that thing.
Oh yeah.
In about maybe 2 miles from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean it was not far from making an escape, and then. But yeah, so. But yeah, that like that's there's a lot of incidents that happen in town. Wildlife stuff.
Well, and I know for the moose specifically, has that changed with the airport as far as the fencing goes? Because I know like along the highways in the southern part of the state, they're required to have those like gaps every so often, and even up here you'll see like anywhere there is like a fenced roadway somewhere, there's these gaps or
Fort
offset.
Wainwright a lot, like stuff like that.
They'll have like overlapping sections, but there's like 4 feet in between the overlap sections to allow wildlife to pass back and forth.
No, I mean that they don't want moose on the runway for obvious reasons.
Sure,
So
yeah.
no, it's a no-go zone for moose. But we did discuss, maybe making sure they maintain that and knock all those willows down so the moose don't want to be in there.
Right.
That was part of the discussion, and then, but like he mentioned Fort Wainwright. When I worked for them for a little bit, they have one-way moose gates that'll let moose come in off of the highway, but won't let them go back out. And they're kind of this spring-loaded contraption, and it works great until it gets cold.
Sure.
And then the grease in it sticks, and that thing stays open, and then they can come and go as they please. But that's not really the time that they're doing the most movement. So
Right.
it's probably all right for the majority of it. But yeah, I mean, that's actually what they had. And then they had like we were changing SD cards and trail cameras on all of those along the highway, and yeah, I mean but that's where the majority of that stuff happens. And then obviously lots of moose that get hit by cars, and
Yeah. Well, and as you'd mentioned, there's the call out list for that, for people to come harvest that.
yeah.
if
So
people
there's
get hit.
there's 2. There's one through the troopers for like salvageable meat, and then unsalvageable meat. Say a moose got hit and got pushed in the ditch, nobody found it, whatever. There's Fish and Game used to maintain a trapper list where trappers could come pick it up
Cool.
and get permitted. And I can't remember. I think it's 5 bait sites. You can only use that at 5 locations. And
Okay.
some stuff like that. But yeah, you could get permits for that. And
isn't there a call list for problem moose as well, to come take out like problem moose?
there
Or
really
maybe there used to be.
so
I know I heard about that as a thing back in the day.
So there's a permit, and it was a muzzleloader archery permit, and they kind of created that to allow hunters to go harvest it if it was being an issue,
Mm-hmm.
and people would sign up for it. And it really depended on the situation and how you could legally do it, right? Because they couldn't use
Sure.
radio communication. They couldn't use all the things that like we would use to dispatch a moose. Like, we're driving around and somebody calls us, hey, it's in our yard, and we drive over there and then went to the next yard. But you're kind of tracking along by people calling. They couldn't really do that. And so I think it had some merit, and it probably still does, but I don't think it gets used as much
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of reasons. And then somebody has to just have the time to dedicate to go and looking for this one specific individual animal on the landscape.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the majority of it was dealing with and sometimes, I mean, like we would have people that come in and be like, hey, we're looking for we've got the Fairbanks Management antlerless permit, and we'd have people come in and I mean, hang up the phone, and they're like, oh, well, I mean, you okay with shooting a cripple?
Mm-hmm.
Because you might, I mean,
Yeah.
you might go look in this general area and maybe you stumble upon it, maybe not. But, and kind of, I mean, the rule that we usually had was a broken back leg. They could recover from that. Broken front leg, it was pretty much a fatal wound at that point. And so we would usually go dispatch them and drag them out to the road or get them close to where somebody could recover it.
Could actually utilize the meat, yeah.
I remember you and I had hunting plans one time, and you were supposed to come to the house, and I'm like, where the heck's Carl at, man? You were like getting ready to leave or something. I can't remember what the deal was. And you're like, I'm like, Carl, where are you at? You're like, well, I'm to your house, but you're like, I'm hunting, but we're not going hunting together. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're like, I'm looking for a moose with a 5-gallon bucket on its head.
Yeah.
I see you go by the house.
Yeah. And Tomato Cage had one that had
I think that might be what it was, a tomato cage or something.
But they get, and you get other places where it's a little more forgiving weather.
Mm.
You'll have people, we've seen quite a few moose with like laundry lines hung up in their antlers.
Yep.
Christmas lights, wicker chair, all kinds of different stuff. But yeah, so that was kind of the majority of like the nuisance response stuff.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, what was you said you guys used to weigh the moose calves? What was like the average you'd say for a calf like that?
I don't remember. I mean, we did a few different areas. We would do like the 20A area. We'd do Minto Flats. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I know like that was one of the major metrics that we would use for looking at kind of, so to speak, herd health, like and they were definitely lighter.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll look at twinning rates. If moose are healthy and there's abundant food, probability of having twins is higher than someplace where they're density dependent.
Sure. Yeah.
And so that, twinning, like we would do twinning surveys in the spring. We would go out and look, different things like that. But yeah, I mean, you definitely see different areas, and that, obviously translates even into the bulls. And roughly, I mean, all your new calves should probably be about 50-50 ratio, bulls to cows when they're born. But, post-hunt population, ideal was about 30 bulls per 100 cows. So not quite a quarter, or, somewhere right around there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, that was a lot of most of what we did.
Well, interesting stuff. I've always wanted to look into more. I mean, just exactly what you're talking about. Just kind of how much. I mean, sounds like you've dealt with a lot of moose. And I was always curious how much effort actually went into, I guess, the surveying and all of that. Because I know you hear some people, horror stories about how, they haven't looked over here in so long and blah, blah. They haven't looked over there. And a lot of it's just resources, honestly, if they haven't. Or maybe they're just not worried about that area, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a combination of both. I mean, some of it is, and without going in down another rabbit trail altogether, it's like the sheep stuff, right?
Right.
Without going too far, if you're managing it to full curl and 8 years old and all these things, right? You're kind of the most stringent management you can do
Right. Yeah.
and still have a reasonable success rate for hunters in the field. And so, if you're managing moose, if it's a 14 or 15 day season with antler restrictions and all of these things, yeah, you can go survey it all you want. And you can find out there aren't that many moose out there.
Right.
But unless you have the resources to go through and change that, you're not going to change management. You're not going to scale it down, unless you're to the point where there's a concern that you're going to close a season.
Right. Right.
And so that would be the only way that you would even tighten down the restrictions beyond, like I said, antler restrictions and a short season, all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you shorten the season, but at some point it's kind of like, what's the point of even having a season if it's a week long? And
Right.
and so, yeah, that would be that's some of it. And then some of it is, more bang for your buck, and some of those other in some of those places where you have a lot more hunting effort, you have a lot more hunters, you have more management concerns. Maybe you have a higher predator number. Maybe you have, like I said, a bad winter. You want to get an idea, or you're looking at, how do we change this? Can we go from an antler restriction back to a any bull season, things like that, right? And so that's. And same thing, if you have a low density population, you're probably going to have, and it's not road accessible, it's remote, where it's fly in, boat in.
Right.
You're probably not going to be changing your management strategy, so it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of resources.
Yeah, because you're not going to have the pressure there.
Right.
Right.
And sometimes we would do remote stuff. Usually if there was funding available, maybe from another source, we would look at doing places that are remote. Sometimes it'd be like, we're partnering up with a refuge to do a remote part of a refuge, or a giant part of a refuge even, in some cases. But yeah, and then we would do some stuff in the springtime. We did some spring surveys, which had different, because it's all, just they're adults or calves, and you're not getting a bull to cow ratio and some of that stuff, and so you're not getting composition data is really what it comes down to. And so sometimes they'll do those in the fall and go through and do composition in an area, and then just come up with a moose number in the springtime. But and that might be and sometimes it's like weather dependent. You go up further west, they don't have snow as early as we might in the interior. Competition for pilots, there's probably, I don't know, we'll just say 24 pilots. Well, if they're all on projects already,
right,
drawing them out to another project. And then you're up against the darkness, and you're up against the cold. And, moose, really, we didn't want to start moose surveys any later than the first week of December, because there's a probability that you're going to miscategorize bulls as cows when they drop their antlers.
Right.
And so you didn't, so you were also against that time crunch. Now, sometimes you get lucky and you get enough snow to do that early, like maybe late October. And, and without going too far into it, that may bias results a little bit too. If you're consistently doing them second week in November every year, and you start in October, you're going to have congregations of bulls in places that you wouldn't otherwise.
Right.
You may even be getting potentially into that like second rut, and have, big congregations of moose. And that was the same thing in the springtime. You'd have some places along rivers where they've got good browse and different things. You've seen units with 300 moose in them, in 6 square miles. And obviously they don't live in that density all the time, but they're there at that time because that's where there's browse and different things like that. There's a ton of variation in how to get a number, and sometimes it's more useful than others and different things like that. But so any info is better than no info.
And I think it kind of falls into that category of things where it's like a lot of people wish there was this magical way to like get the exact number of moose in the area and an exact idea of their health, and but it's same with the fish, same with caribou, same with everything else. It's like, but there's only so much a human can do,
I actually worked with a biologist that before he retired, and he actually thought that we could come up with a better estimate statewide for the number of moose by looking at the harvest and saying whatever we were harvesting 2% of the moose on the landscape, tallying up all the moose that were harvested, and then doing the back math and saying this is how many moose are on the landscape. And he's like, it would probably be more accurate than going through and trying to total all these up with all these numbers. And I don't know. It'd be interesting to look back and look at some of that stuff. And I mean, it would be hard because obviously you're not surveying the whole state in 1 year.
Right.
But
right.
if you could back calculate that, it might be interesting to see some of that, or break it down by region or some way to be interesting to really dive into that.
Well, and kind of along those lines of trying to get better numbers, I know we've talked about it a little bit, but there's one tidbit for anybody that's trying to moose hunt around town here in Fairbanks, if any of our local listeners are tuning in, is all of the moose hunting, locally speaking, has been turned into a registration tag. Looks like 2 separate registration tags for units 20 and I believe it's section of 25C, or all of 25C, sorry. I think we've touched on this a couple times on the show. I think we actually even got your opinion on that earlier in this year.
Yeah, but, I think I talked about it when it first came. The board first finalized that regulation, and
right.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I can see where that would be kind of frustrating for folks that are used to getting their green moose harvest ticket every year. With that said, the low reporting on those,
right?
If you're in with changes and increased hunter effort and all of those things in the area, understanding how many people actually went and hunted, how much time they spent, you get better information to make better management decisions, and some of that could come back to be a benefit to hunters. I mean, not just in terms of more numbers or more moose or stuff like that, but it definitely is one of those things where you could see some changes to seasons.
Sure.
And it'll what it will do is provide more precise information in this area to make decisions. If no other reason, it'll give you a better idea of how many moose are actually being killed, how many are not, how many are unreported until the following season. I mean, there's a lot of people that would just bring in their Ziploc bag and turn everything in when they got their harvest tickets for the next year, and
how
you didn't get that information until decisions
after the report's already been done,
right? Yeah.
I'll say how huge of a difference do you think that's going to make? I mean, is it going to be a massive difference to have all of that data more? Because I mean, with the new rules, you're required to report within 15 days of kill or 15 days of close of season. So I mean, it's definitely going to be before the reports are put in, or before the reports are written, I should say.
Yeah.
Do you think it'll be like a huge impact on being able to make decisions?
I don't know that up front it'll be a huge thing. I think it'll definitely what it will do is get the harvest information in really quick.
Yeah.
Right. You'll be able to find out, right off within we'll say by the end of October, you'll know how successful moose season was, what your harvest was, things like that. I mean, you'll still have a few outstanding permits, maybe people hunting the late season archery hunt around Fairbanks.
Sure.
Some small or smaller percentage hunts and stuff like that, but the vast majority of the harvest will already be accounted for, or the success rates, things like that, and it'll give the ability for the department to be able to sit down with hunters, sit down, with the board, whoever, and really say, yeah, it was a subpar season. It was a good season. We had good harvest. This was our average antler. I mean, whatever kind of information that people are out there looking for.
Sure.
What percentage were over 50, what percentage, all of those things based on all of that, and non-resident, resident numbers, things like that. And
yeah.
No, the downside, and the one thing that hunters should be aware of is once you go to a registration system, you can fail to be able to be eligible the next year if you
Yep.
don't report. So that will be the biggest change for the vast majority of people is,
It brings enforcement.
well, what it'll do. I mean, yeah, I mean, and most people don't want to pay the fine for failing to report and all of those things, but the loss of opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably going to be the biggest punishment for the vast majority of people. I mean, I don't know what the fine is, but I can
Right.
tell you it's probably less than what most people spend on a moose moose hunting trip.
Mm.
You know, even if it was just fuel and ammo and some food,
Right. Right.
they'd probably spend, that. So, um, yeah, it's just
But
going to be
being ineligible for the next year would be the
being
bigger
ineligible
thing.
for the next hunting season is the
Yeah.
one that'll get a lot of people. And I I suspect, like on the vast majority of the hunts that they've done when they've switched it over from a general season to a registration or
Mm-hmm.
something like that, there was a little more leniency than, like the 40-mile caribou hunt where it's been going that way for a long time. People that participate probably should know better by now, right?
Right. Right.
Somebody new to it, and they might forget, whatever, like do it like they did before, and so there might be a little more grace, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it has a lot of potential to be a good thing. I know there's a lot of people worried about it in town, but I've just gotta just hope it's gonna work out okay. I just hope it doesn't turn into like a like a subsistence thing where it gets less and less opportunity. But at the same time, if they deem that necessary, it's because there's not enough moose to sustain it being a harvest ticket. So I mean it's kind of
I think the biggest issue that most people are going to encounter, because I've been in Fairbanks long enough to know this, is that people procrastinate, wait until the last minute, whether it's buying ammo to go duck hunting
mm-hmm.
or it's getting their permits.
Yep.
And you're going to need a printer. You're going to need to do this and have access to that. You can't run over to Walmart or Fred Meyer's at 10 o'clock at night and get this.
Right.
I actually talked to a couple of different people, and I was like, hey, if you guys had a setup where they could use a printer, you probably get a lot of hunters showing up here to print stuff.
Oh yeah. 10 cents a copy.
Yeah, I mean, and that's once again, that's cheap, right? It's the fact that you don't have a way to print permit, you don't have a way to do this, and so, yeah, if you're listening, do it early, get it ahead of time. I mean, I think they made it available July 1st or something like that. So,
I believe you're right. Yeah.
So I mean, just like the regular harvest tickets, they made it available at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Yep.
don't wait till the last minute and try and go somewhere and get it.
Yeah, and for anybody listening, depending on where you're hunting, if you want to go get that permit now rather than waiting till the first, if you're hunting in units 20A, 20B, 20C, 20F, or 25C, you're required to have the RM781 permit, and if you're hunting moose in 20D, you're required to have the RM749 permit. So those are the ones you want to look for when you're going to get those. Make sure you got them printed off. Sure, if you go to Fish and Game, they can print them for you there, but it doesn't sound like... I doubt at this point you'd be able to get them at Sportsman's or anything like that. I don't even know... You can't even get the 40-mile registration permits at Sportsman's anymore, I don't think.
No, and like when I worked there, we had a few issues where we had websites crashing, Fish and Game website crashed, and we were doing hard copy permits and things like that, but I mean, that's a huge workload.
Yeah.
Back at the Fish and Game office to deal with those and keeping track of all of that paperwork and all of that. So yeah, I mean, with that much time where it's available, I think that's pretty much going to be a Fish and Game online.
Print them at home or at work.
Go to the library, I mean, wherever.
Library. It's a good option. They're open again now. So.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you for your enlightenment on that, and let's take a break real quick.
Okay.
Hammer Bullets produces what we at the Northern Hunter consider to be the most premium and best working monolithic bullets on the market today. These bullets are easy to load, extremely accurate, and best of all, they're always in stock and ready to ship. The guys at Hammer designed them so that after penetrating the hide of an animal, it sheds its petals, initiating a massive energy dump while retaining the rear shank for maximum penetration. These bullets are built with 100% focus on how they perform on game, and their proprietary designs produce great BCs with specialized pressure grooves for amazing inherent accuracy and speed. They have a minimum expansion velocity of 1,800 feet per second, which allows for long-range shots, but with no maximum velocity, making them perfect for every cartridge from your granddaddy's old 30-30, to the high-velocity round like the Weatherby 3378 without having to worry about your bullet failing. To view their expansive selection and find the perfect match for your hunting needs, go to hammerbullets.com and use discount code TheNorthernHunter to drop the hammer on your next adventure. All right, so aside from all the experience you have with moose as far as the management side of things go, you've also done quite a bit of moose hunting for your personal self as well, I've gathered from all of the stories I've heard. But I wanted to present, before we get into like the methods, if there's any like particular stories that stuck out in your mind kind of about what we're about to talk about.
Actually, like probably the best story that I have is I went with a buddy of mine just across the river here in town, and I had a a late season any bull permit and or full, through the 25th of September, and I usually try and wait until the last half when moose are a little more responsive to calling, and was kind of just going. And I kind of had, excuse me, taken off some time from work and had planned this out, and the weather was just garbage. It was windy, it was rainy, and not because I'm a fair weather moose hunter, but the fact that it's pretty hard to call if it's real windy. They can't hear anything. You're just wasting your time. They're usually bedded down once you get pretty stiff wind, and so yeah, I kind of just kind of held off, and it ended up being the last day of the season, and put in and kind of floated, and I was calling, and pretty much got down to the last stand of before sunset on the last day of the season, and was calling on a clearing, had some like steps and trees where you just climb up and call, and then you're call on the ground, and we'll kind of get into that, but call on the ground and then climb up and look around. I mean, not real stealthy to climb up and down a tree, but if they're focused on the ground, they're not really looking at you. But
right.
And the stuff was pretty high. It was probably all 6-8 feet tall, so you weren't going to see through it on the ground at all. And and so all dejected, came back, walking back and look across the creek, and there's a little spike bull, forkhorn bull, staring at me at like 58 yards. And so I shot it, and then of course it died between two like trees and wedged itself in there, and had to cut the trees out to even begin to deal with it.
They never die in the easy spots to get to them.
No, I mean, I guess it kept it from going in the water that way, but
right.
But yeah, so I mean, and yeah, I guess kind of the A is don't give up, and kind of be patient, but at the same time, it makes sense to hunt when you have the conditions. And I'm not saying don't hunt, but sometimes you're not gaining anything by calling if it's windy or really raining hard where sound doesn't travel. So
right, yeah, I would say, I mean, patience is key in any form of hunting, but I mean, especially when it comes to moose hunting, it's a huge thing, and we see it every year where people get all bent out of shape after the first week when they don't see anything,
Yeah,
and then they all quit,
Yeah.
and then you're alone out there. But which is, don't get me wrong, that's kind of nice sometimes. But
you know what I was going to ask you, Carl, if you could tell that story about when you had that cow charge you. Just,
Which
I mean,
time?
that kind of falls in place when you and our buddy were out and you got charged and he ended up dumping that thing. That was pretty wild.
Oh, when
you had shot it in the head a couple times, I think, and
Oh,
it was
yeah.
still coming.
So I
thought I'd heard the story you were talking about, but I don't think I have.
was like, which time did I got charged by a cow?
Yeah.
Oh, it was the time that
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. So, yeah, we'd been floating this thing, and we decided we were just going to take the boat up there and look at a few spots and call and see what happened. And it was super late season, and it was we had antlerless permits, and we're motoring along, see a moose, so pull up, and then I shoot it, and it goes down. We see this tree shaking like, I don't know, 25, 30 yards off of off of the creek, and then fire up the boat and go over there and hand my buddy my rifle and go in to dispatch it or see if it was dead, and had my 44, and he's kind of following in after me, and we see it, and it wasn't quite dead, and I was going to just shoot it, and about when I was figured where I could make a good, clean final shot, he says I wouldn't go any closer, and the thing stands up, pins its ears back, and starts coming at me. I go to step back, and then I go right over a tussocks onto my back, and I'm basically staring at this thing coming at me, and shot it once, right between the eyes, and didn't phase it. Hit it again right above the eye. Got a little bit of a head shake, and it stopped. And meanwhile, he throws up the rifle, pulls it back down, and adjusts the scope, because of course I had left it on 9 power.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lesson there. And finally shoots it again with an .6, so it got hit with 2 30-06 rounds and 2 44 rounds before it finally, expired.
Did that shot between the eyes just didn't do anything?
Didn't even phase it.
Really?
Yeah, and I've talked to a lot of guys that have shot moose like in charging situations, and they're like, they've just fed them lead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they for some reason they don't, the off switch isn't there.
Well, and it's weird because, the kind of the standard thing to do is draw a line between the right ear and the left eye and the left ear and the right eye
Mm-hmm.
and make an X.
Yeah.
And then that's your kind of your sweet spot. And being at a downward angle, shooting up, if I hit it between the eyes, that should have been right where it was supposed to go. And I mean, it definitely turned up the hair right there, but that was the extent of it. I don't know how far. I wish I actually had that skull, because I would love to see the bullet.
I was going to ask, did you look at the skull
No.
at all, or no? No.
No.
Just changed your pants and got to work, huh?
Yeah, pretty much. That was the same trip where I almost drowned under a moose quarter.
Oh, gee.
We were helping somebody else pack out a moose, and they had the lantern, and they were cutting it up, and we just grabbed pack frames and started going. And I had one of the old Alice frame army packs, which are not good for moose, by the way. Their center of gravity is a little too high.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That, and so what had happened is it was in the swamp, and I had it in the bag, and the quarter sticking up 10 feet in the air basically by the time you got to the end of the leg. And it started swinging, and I was just standing there, and all of a sudden I'm falling forward, just slow motion, like just slowly tipping over into the swamp. And then I got this thing, and I got my hands out. And now I'm in the swamp, and the water's just slowly coming up, and I'm like, "Hey, I need help. Oh, we'll be over there in a second." I'm like, "No, now."
Yeah.
So they drop, and by the time, because they didn't want to roll over and stick the whole quarter in the mud, and by the time they got there, my face was about 3 inches from the water, and I'm just slowly just getting pushed under the weight of the moose quarter into the mud. And
it's like one of those intense scenes from like an Indiana Jones movie when he's just like getting closer and closer to death.
Well, and I got to the point where I was thinking about it. I'm like, I don't know if I can get my hands out of this mud without getting turned over, and then you got to get out of the pack frame and the straps and all of it. Yeah, no, that was probably not the smartest thing I've ever done.
Terrifying.
Well, and that's one thing to keep in mind too, is the mud out there in moose country. Like, you actually kept me from going under Chris last season. Remember that when I stepped down into the bank off the cut bank? And
I don't.
So it was when you and I were out hunting.
Okay.
And we were trying to get to the canoe without having to go all the way around. And I was like, I want to see how thick this mud is, because it was intermittent. Like, sometimes it was
scared
dense.
of it.
Yeah,
you
were scared of it.
I knew what that was all
and
about.
I was like, well, so 10 feet up the bank, you could walk on it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, this stuff looks more soupy. I bet it is more soupy. I was like, just watch my back, bro, and I want to test this stuff out. And my intent was to just tap my foot on it, and then my second leg went out from under me, and I was,
just getting sucked in.
over knee deep, like instantly. And luckily we had planned this out, and he just wrapped his arms right underneath my armpits and just pulled me right back up. But like, that would have been.
I feel like I kind of remember that. I feel like being like, man, can I pick James up?
Yeah. You're so strong.
Ain't no different than a roll of carpet, I guess.
Right. But no, I mean, that's something to keep in mind. I mean, that's why, I had him right there, but like,
Dude, you got to think about that stuff too when you're solo.
yeah,
I mean,
that's the thing. Yeah. Is there's nobody to catch you when that second foot goes
or
out.
like from a gear loss perspective, like get a boot sucked off your leg and that's your boot for the trip or something.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of moose hunting solo. I mean, I know guys that do it, and there's a lot of thought on it, but it's a lot of work. And really, if you're going to split it between two households is probably a fair.
Yeah.
If you want to shoot a moose every year, anyway.
I don't know that I've ever kept a full moose, to be honest with you. Like, I think it's always been a half that goes in my freezer and a half that goes to between either multiple other freezers or my hunting partner's freezer.
I've split moose with buddies, and I'm like, I don't know how a guy, and I'm sure a lot of guys would probably like laugh at this, but I don't know how you could store a whole moose
Right.
between like fish and birds and everything else. And
I would say combined.
Costco, and I mean that's a lot of storage.
Yeah, I mean, if and I forget, I used to know, but I think it's about 300 pounds of meat off of an average bull or maximum weight on a big bull.
Yeah, 300 to 400, I think is what I remember.
So just figure 360 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost a pound a day
Yeah.
that you have to eat. And sure, if you got a big family, that's not really that much.
Right.
You're splitting it, but
if you got 6 kids,
or you got a wife that knows how to cook like mine, and you eat more than you should. Yeah, well,
but I mean,
it's
if
a lot of food.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to eat fish, we'll say you eat fish 2 days a week. Now you got to figure out how to get that other 2 pounds, and sure you want to have a little bit left over, but at the end of when you got half a moose in there at the end of the season or the next season,
right?
And so usually a half was more than enough.
The thing I don't like about moose hunting, the idea of moose hunting solo, and I do everything by myself. I call by myself. I bear bait by myself. Is the bear element. And it's a different mood that those bears are in by that time of year. It just seems like there's so much more stuff crawling around that time of year, desperate to eat before winter.
It's because it's starting to get cold.
Yeah, it's not like when you got a bucket of donuts somewhere and that's what they care about.
You're at the target all the time, yeah.
Right.
And like dressing a moose out, and I feel like you're kind of subjecting yourself to that a little longer too. Like if you're dressing a moose out solo and you're tying a leg up to a tree or like hoisting something, you're just spending more time in that mess.
Well, and I've told this story before on the show, but there was my buddy Clib and I went out and got a moose one year, and it was not 10 minutes after he pulled the trigger on it, we had 2 black bears show up. It was a sow with a very old cub. It was not a basketball cub by any stretch.
That's wild.
And like this was the last time it was going to den up with her, probably. I would imagine. And I almost shot her, but then we saw the second one, and I'm like, well, But either way, so they circled us the entire time we were dressing that moose.
Yeah.
They wouldn't come in super close. They tried like twice, but then him and I were just chasing back off. But I mean, it was like a dinner bell. They knew something was good.
That's
going
concerning
down.
too when they just don't show any concern for you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
Yeah, they'd hang up at about 30, 40 yards.
Probably been at a bear bait station or 2 together a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
Had some good experiences.
Right.
Well,
it is something to keep in mind, though. I mean, even with 2 people,
I actually have a couple friends that won't shoot moose in the afternoon. They'll only shoot morning moose. And I was like, well, I would love to have a spot where I got to choose to shoot moose in the morning and not in the evening. Because usually it's always, within the hour before it's dark. And now you're doing it in the dark. And then I've had it where you hear bear jaw pops and thrashing and carrying on, trying to get you to leave in the dark.
That was the situation we were in. I think he dropped that thing at like 8 p.m. Like it was right before dark.
Yep.
And I mean, by the time we made first cuts, it was, waning light and then just pitch black.
Yeah.
That's the thing when you got, eyes looking at you from the brush and you're like,
how'd you notice them?
Oh, we saw them before it was dark.
Like were they just kind of like looking at you guys from a distance?
No, so he was up on a like a knoll, like up overlooking this pond area, and that's where he shot this moose was right in front of this pond. And luckily, I mean, phenomenal shot, this guy. So like he dumped it.
So I've heard.
Yeah, he dumped it before it even had a chance to get to the water. It didn't live long enough to make it to the water, and And I mean, we had to unbury the antlers because it just went and just buried itself in the dirt, nose, antlers, everything. But no, I mean, they popped up right on the other side of the pond and just like looking across, and then that's the one was standing up, and I had my crosshairs on her chest already, ready to squeeze the trigger, and then all of a sudden the second one popped up right next to her, and I'm like, come on. And but and it doesn't matter. I mean, the regs are the regs, right? Like even if that cub, I guarantee that cub would have survived, but like an accompanied sow is an accompanied sow. It doesn't matter. Like that's them's is the rules. So so
she
probably
made him skedaddle before it got too cold. She probably was like,
probably, yeah. But no, so we just got to work on that bull, and then but we saw him first time we saw him on that side of the pond. They were walking towards us. Basically, I think they got to about I don't know, 30, 35 yards, something like that, 40 yards, and then him and I both grabbed our rifles and just deep voice, get out of here! What are you doing? And just walked towards them, and they turned around, and then they kind of came back, and then they go away again, and then we'd see them from a different angle, and they just be watching us from the bushes.
Was this the whole time?
Oh yeah, the entire time.
That's concerning.
Yeah, no, and it got super dark because there was it was a little bit overcast, so there was no
ambient light.
No ambient light. We had the wheelers there, but all you can see is the headlights. Nothing behind the wheeler. Like if something had walked up from us from behind the wheeler, we'd have no idea it was there. But it was a little spooky. I mean, but you do what you do. You just get out of there with your moose and hope nothing bad happens. I mean, that's what we do our entire lives here, right? It's like just kind of
mine and Carl's
go
buddy.
do what you do.
Yeah, that's true. Mine and Carl's buddy were floating this slough, and we see what he thought was a beaver at first. He's like, "Oh, is that a beaver?" It's a grizzly head sticking out of the water.
No kidding.
And he's crossing this slough, and we're floating, and he gets up out on the other side of the bank and just shakes off and looks at us and walks up the bank, and I'm like, that's a bear I would not want to be around dressing a moose out. He didn't really have any concern for that and usually they're kind of up and out of there once they notice you. And I was like, that guy was way too mellow and that's where where we were moose hunting.
And it's a sad deal, but I mean, we've heard several stories over the last few years of guys getting mauled at moose kill sites. I mean, there was 2 guys down in the Wrangles last year, wasn't it? One of them got mauled while the other one was running a meat load back to the camp or something like that.
I think that's how that went. Yeah.
Yeah. And he came back and his buddy had been mauled, and it's a sad thing, but I mean, it's one of those things.
Did he make it?
No.
Oh man.
No. Yeah. DOA. But like, yeah. And it's a sad deal. And that's not the first story I've heard of that nature.
No, I mean, in that situation, I don't think I'd be hanging out by it. I mean, I know plenty of people that have had, I mean, I watched actually, like during survey season, it was an observation we had. We were like, what's this pattern in the snow?
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably a 60+ inch bull that, had probably been wounded, tore up, whatever. Cause we were following the tracks. Like we saw these in the fresh snow and we were following these tracks, and we get into like this clump of trees, and it looked like an asterisk coming out of the trees in every direction. And I mean, it was about 4 feet wide where the snow was completely. And what had happened is that moose had wandered in there, and there was a grizzly bear hanging out. He killed that bull, right there.
That's a feat.
And then he had buried it, and that's what all those little marks were, is where he was dragging the stuff, like basically sod, like rolling sod back to that thing to cover this and bury this whole moose.
Because he didn't have any like thawed ground to bury it in.
And he was laying on top of it. I mean, just sprawled out, looked like a bear rug on top of this. And you could see the antlers, and then you're like, oh, what? And it was kind of snowing, so it was a little white. And you could just see this bear just sprawled out, lay it out on top of this thing. Probably had his fill and was, whatever, staying warm. Who knows, the whole deal. I don't know how long he'd been dead, but I mean, that they can pick up a whole moose and carry it like a dog carries a chew toy, I mean, if they want to, they can do that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have another buddy that they shot a moose, gutted it, and then we're going to come back and deal with it the next day. Split it open and to cool off, and then go back to it the next day. And came back, and the moose is gone.
Yeah.
and they found it. They followed the bear tracks.
Yep.
And then, of course, you're in there looking through this, and it's half buried and half ruined. And
yeah, and that's never in the spot you want to be.
No, no. I don't care if it was in the middle of a sandbar. I wouldn't want to be there.
Right. Well, and that's a good mentality thing to keep in mind. I mean, there's, you hear those stories too all the time where people come back, even if they're in groups of 4.
Yeah.
Hauling meat back to camp, and then they come back for the second half, and could be midday, and then all of a sudden there's a bear standing right on top of your moose.
Yeah.
Something you got to be prepared for. Same mentality as when you're walking into the bait. Like, there's something there that a bear would want to eat.
I think even more so, honestly, because it's almost like, bears coming into bait are, maybe a little bit predatory, but bears that are going in to eat meat.
That's true. Yeah.
Are kind of have that.
Well, and those bears are full in a bait station. They're
well fed.
They're doing like caloric maintenance.
They're just making their rounds.
Bear is stocking up for winter.
Yeah. I think they have that they're almost in kill mode. Like, okay. Even though this thing's dead, they tune on that, hey, I'm going to go get meat.
Mm-hmm.
And, definitely gut pile stuff, all of that kind of situation. And it's interesting. Like bear, where you're at, some places they don't want you to put fish guts in the river. Some places they want you, here, everything you want to put all your fish guts back in the river if you can, because obviously you're not going to attract bears to the shore. But, I think it's kind of the same thing. I'm not working that hard to drag a moose gut pile, 300 pounds of guts into the river unless it's right there.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that was one reason, like, especially on that, and that's the only time I've had a bears that close to a kill site for myself, and that's why I've referenced that story a couple times now. But we took it all out in one fell swoop. We didn't make trips because I was like, it's pitch black. I just don't want to deal with that.
You guys like pack that all out, and
we had machines.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we just processed it all out, loaded everything up on the machine that we wanted to keep, and then got out of there in one fell swoop. We didn't make trips and everything like that. And luckily, we were able to do that. And that we had that privilege of being in that situation.
It would have been interesting to sit that like for a couple days post kill and see what other bears showed up on that.
Yeah,
had you had some time.
Had we been able to take a few more days off work, that was our plan actually. But we reached out, and it was not a thing that was going to happen that year. So.
But. Yeah, I guess I have another one, and this was actually a friend of mine. He had a federal subsistence permit, and we were going down. We were actually going to Chittenden. And we're like, well, we'll take stuff just in case we see, because he was thinking caribou. And of course, we're all geared up for dip netting and maybe some game bags and stuff. We had 4-wheelers. We were going to Chittenden, and he ends up seeing this moose, and all I saw on the water were like ripples, like you'd see in a duck. Like how ducks make ripples on water, but it was big. It was like, 3-inch waves. And I'm like, well, that is not a duck. Nothing I've ever seen, And then I'm like, okay. And we ended up finding it was a moose. And I'm like, man, it was like 1,200 feet down a ridge into a swamp. And I'm like, oh no. Okay, let's go fishing.
Right.
And
that's that don't even look down there valley.
And then he's like, I've never killed a moose. I'm like, oh no. So we scurry down there to, I don't know, about 200 feet above it, and perfect downhill. Well, and he didn't account for the, shooting downhill, bullet doesn't drop, that stuff, and hit it high. And, but it dropped right there. And fortunately, it was in the middle of a swamp on a little dry island, and it died, or didn't die right there. It dropped right there. Well, he had spine shot it because we were above it. So then we went back all the way back up to we walked down to the edge of the beaver pond. We couldn't get in there, not with knee boots. It was too deep. So
yeah,
we walked all the way back up to our wheelers, went back to the truck, got chest waders, and he had hip boots. And then we went 4-wheeled back, and then we walked all the way back down there. And we got down there, and of course this thing was, not quite expired, and so we had to finish it off. Well, we cut it up, and I'm like, well, at least we're in the middle of a swamp. If anything starts coming towards us, we'll be able to hear it. But we elected just to, and it was all little dead spruce trees, no bigger than my thumb in diameter, and we had a fire going all night. slept next to that fire, just in the swamp, in our waders, long sleeve shirt, just curled up next to this fire, take turns. And then the next morning we get up and he tells me, he's like, can I do the uphill packing part? I'm like, why? And he's like, I got a hole in my waders. I want to get some dry socks and, get my feet dry. And I'm like, yeah. So he went back up to the wheelers, and I started packing moose across the swamp. And then I would drop them off and just take the other pack frame, the empty one, and go get the next quarter. And we did that. And then we brought one 4-wheeler all the way down, strapped this whole thing on, the whole moose on one 4-wheeler, had it on the seat, had it on everything.
What?
And then he just ran the throttle on that side of the 4-wheeler, and I helped it on the other side, and we walked that thing all the way up out of there in one shot.
No kidding.
Yeah.
You still had all your shocks at the end of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was steep. It wasn't really rough. It was just steep. And so
That's a lot of weight to put on a wheeler.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was probably 800 pounds,
Mm-hmm.
but he wasn't on it.
That's what I mean.
So I mean, if you put a half a moose on there and you rode it,
Sure.
it's
yeah.
not really that much different.
True.
Yeah, that'd be like just, like that'd be fine just to walk out like several miles just next to your wheeler, working the throttle with all your
That's
moose,
what we did.
on the,
Up the hill.
That would work.
Yeah.
Just kind of changes the walking element a little bit.
just a skosh.
Sure, you're probably still shot by the end from trying to reach over that throttle and steer that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that was the thing, is with one person on each side, we were able to, he just have to run the throttle and I'd steer one way, And there were some little dips and stuff that we had like help the back end over, and it's not like even two guys are not lifting up the back end with a moose on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we made it work. We got it out of there.
Nice.
And but yeah, no, that was a pretty good one.
Mm-hmm.
So
I had a little tidbit here where I was going to ask you about gear, and I think we're kind of
there.
We're kind of there, yeah. So, but it's funny with this last story you brought up, is one of the things I had in mind was stuff to bring specifically for a moose hunt that you might not bring on a regular hunting trip. In addition to your rain gear and your regular boots and stuff like that you would normally have anyways. But like waders, I think, is a huge thing for moose country, because they don't call them swamp donkeys for nothing.
Yeah. Unless you're hunting in an area that's higher elevation stuff, like an old burn or something like that, where it's higher elevation and you're
mountain moose.
Yeah, foothills type stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, waders would be a key piece of gear.
Yeah, because they run for water when you shoot them. If you don't shoot them dead on the spot, the first thing they try to do is go towards the closest body of water they can.
Something I'm a firm believer of too, and I've got Carl going on this, is every hunt needs an otter sled.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. Like,
yeah.
I'll even, like, now on the boat, if I'm solo on the boat doing something, I've got the otter sled with the gear in it so that thing's not just taking up dead space. Like, like you can do a lot with an otter sled.
Yes, you can.
And if you're in some mucky stuff or some nasty, like muddy terrain, you can put your moose meat in there, and you can't put a lot in there. You can't overload it, but it'll keep your meat clean. It's a lot nicer to pull your meat around in those things.
I like those otter sleds.
I use them for everything.
Yeah.
I pull my bears out whole with the otter sled. I usually gut my bears and throw them in that otter sled and drag them home whole. I've always done that. Like caribou hunting,
Yep, I've used them for caribou.
It is so useful.
Yeah. Well, and like especially with like caribou and stuff like that, or even bears especially. Like, you don't want to be dragging that hair across the ground. If that's something you're trying to save, like to hide.
Something else I've thought about too is like, well, that's a good point.
Yeah, you'll rub them raw.
I've thought about it even for last year. The ground was super mucky and it was just nasty out, and we were crane hunting, throwing cranes in there.
Oh, yeah.
Just like, and then
that's a great idea.
Well, and it's a multi-purpose piece of equipment as well, because where are you usually where you're waterfowl hunting in mucky stuff? And if you're not in a boat or in a blind, you can sit in that otter sled.
Oh
yeah, that's what we were talking about, laying in them.
Yep. And then you can and then when you're done with the day, throw all your gear in there and pull your birds out, and you're not Because, I mean,
Yep.
cranes get heavy quick.
Yeah.
I mean, you start helping a buddy and you guys start hauling stuff out. It gets heavy.
Mhm.
But
I think
Yeah.
both of those go kind of hand in hand, honestly, because the same thing with the waders is like, you never know what you're going to get into out there in moose country.
Yeah.
But typically, you can expect it to be a little swampy.
And
Mhm.
And the thing is, especially with new moose hunters, I mean, when you see a moose standing in water and you can see it from the kneecaps up, that's still really deep water.
Yeah.
Like, that's deeper than you want to be walking.
Yeah.
It's not a whitetail that you're seeing.
no, when it dies in that, it'll be floating.
Yeah, exactly. And when you got to walk out there, throw a lasso around its neck and drag it back to
Yeah.
some higher elevation, then I mean, it's nice to have those waders.
Yeah. Well, and like talking about that, I mean, if you were doing a fly out hunt and you wanted that, I mean, obviously an otter sled probably isn't realistic in a small airplane, but
Just-
those dead sleds, for like doing deer. Yeah, it might be a
Mhm.
quarter at a time, but there's a video out there somewhere where they drag whole moose in Scandinavia and they have it's like a UHMW like
Mhm.
tube. It looks like a funnel.
Yeah.
And they put the back legs through it and they tie off to the back legs and they can drag it whole.
there's some cool designs for that too
Yeah.
to build your own online for
Yeah.
those.
Yep.
And they're really useful. You could take like a blue drum
Mm-hmm.
and cut them out of a blue drum, and then you just roll it up like a piece of paper and tie it off with some
Yeah.
550.
Yeah. Well, a little time for me to do a little plug here. So we're working on a code and all of that, but there is a new company that we're partnering with called BagTech. And BagTech is, I believe their website's live. I'm not sure if they're actually in production yet. I know that they're working on production, but I have to verify. So I'm going to do a gentle release of the sponsorship here. But they've decided they like what we're doing. They want to work with us as well. So BagTech is a new company that's coming out, and their flagship product at the moment is actually a drag bag. And so it's like 5.5 pounds for the smallest version, and I think up to about 7 pounds for the heavier version. And they have 3 different lengths that you can get, and it just rolls up, looks just like a bedroll, on the bottom of your pack or something like that if you wanted to bring that with you. And you unroll it, you can put, they've dragged elk out with it whole and stuff like that, but it has cinch points. You can kind of cinch it up on the sides almost like a toboggan, right? And then comes with a harness system as well that you can drag stuff out with. So as soon as we get a discount code and stuff like that worked out with that company, then we'll be doing a hard release on that sponsorship. But that is a piece of equipment that you can look at for this kind of a scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah, dragging bears out or dragging moose quarters out. I don't know how much of a moose you'd be able to get on
Something
one
like
of
that's
those.
nice too for like predator hunting. I mean, you get a wolf or something. I mean, you're not just going to drag that back to the truck.
Right.
That's not how I think a lot of guys thinks that works that way.
Right.
If you want to have any fur left on it.
Well, and
exactly.
Well, yeah. And even then, I mean,
well, because that wind blown snow, I mean, that'll do some damage.
I mean, Rob's a big dude.
Mhm.
And Rob and I were out doing some predator hunting a couple of years back. Yeah. Oh yeah. And Rob's, I mean, he's a strong, that's a strong dude. Just from his line of work too, his current line of work. He's got, like, I think you mentioned on here, he's got some good upper body strength. And him and we were yarding on a wolf that I shot. And I mean, it took everything we both had to get that thing back to the truck.
Mhm.
But the sled or something roll out like that, you even shoot 2 good husky winter coyotes and you're gonna lose a couple pounds on the way back to the truck between call and gear and your 2 dogs.
Well, and that's where I was thinking with these bags, the drag bags, is like you'd mentioned on a fly out hunt. Like that's going to be a lot less weight and a lot less space than a lead sled would be, but to serve the same purpose. Or not a lead sled, an otter sled. Yeah.
Well, kind of on that same, like, one thing I would do with moose specifically is carry 2 sets of game bags.
Mhm.
With the exception of like a fly out hunt or something like that. Bag to get it out of the field and then a bag to hang it on.
Mhm.
And get it out of that field bag.
Get it out of that field bag.
Yeah.
Get it in a nice dry new bag.
Dry, clean, get
Yeah.
it hung up. I definitely like the breathable bags, like the, synthetic bags, but there's
Mhm.
something to be said for good cotton bags for hanging stuff up, for, getting it cool. And, and it depends on when you shoot it, all that stuff, but you can end up with, needing to keep the bugs off of it and things like
Yeah.
that. That's another one. Kind of, you don't necessarily have to, because it may still take you days to get that thing, even
Oh yeah.
to get it hung up before you can actually leave if you're taking a boat or
Yep.
let alone if you're on a fly out hunt. I mean, you definitely want to have, if you can handle the weight, that would be a good thing to have.
Yeah. One thing I've done to kind of help with the bugs when you have long periods of having to wait for the plane or just wait to get out of there in general is if you can afford the wait, like you said, I like to bring a spray bottle with some white vinegar in it, and you can while you're doing your meat cleaning, once you get it hung up bare, because that's what I do. I'll hang it up bare, just by the joints or by the tendons there, and spray it down with that vinegar, and you can't ever taste that in the after product, but it just, the flies hate that. All the bugs hate that smell, and so it really helps get that crust on before anything takes place. And then I'll just put the bag over that while it's hanging and just cinch off the top real tight.
You can do I've done citrus too. That's worked pretty good.
Yes, citrus spray works just as well.
Vinegar is acetic acid, citric acid. The nice thing about citric acid is you can get the little pouches of it, and it's
mix it up with water.
Yeah, and then just have a spray bottle and a little thing of. Even if you put it in a water bottle and poke a hole in the end of it,
exactly,
and spray it on there.
Those little packets you're talking about. One thing I've done with that in the past is you take, you empty them out in your spray bottle, then you throw your those little tiny spray bottles for gals have them for their hair and whatever in the bathroom. You get one of those, dump your packets out in that, and then throw that in your backpack in a freezer bag. And now you're not hauling water.
Yep.
You're not hauling a liquid, and you're not hauling a big. And then you usually find water.
Especially in moose country.
Hopefully.
And you don't even need to buy, it's pretty common up here, but I assume a lot of places have it. You can just go and get canning citric acid.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to buy a little packet of citric acid. You can just go buy it, and then you get a pint of it, and you can just pour that in, Ziploc.
It.
Well, just whatever. It's just in a powder.
Right.
And you can just however much you want.
Use as needed.
Right.
Yeah. But something like that goes a long way in keeping the bugs off.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times you're going to be sitting there for, 3 days plus, sometimes longer, depending on when your pickup date is.
All right, folks. We all know that one of the most common mishaps in hunting is damage to your rifle scope. Last year, I found the solution to that problem with the Stealthy Hunter rifle cover. It wraps around your scope and actions securely to protect it from getting knocked off of zero or even severely damaged. Stealthy Hunter also has a glassing pad and a wide variety of supplements for the outdoorsman, such as protein powder, CBD products, turmeric, and gut health supplements. They also make a lightweight trauma kit weighing in at just 14 ounces that includes everything you need and nothing you don't for all of your backcountry medical emergencies. To shop all of their equipment and supplements, go to StealthyHunter.com and enter the discount code at checkout, The Northern Hunter, to save on your order today. All Stealthy Hunter equipment is proudly made in the USA.
And if you can handle the weight, the other thing and Chris knows, I don't go anywhere, especially in a boat, without a come along.
Oh, yeah.
For
those are huge.
All kinds of things. I wish I could get a little lighter, but, we've used it for the boat recovery.
Yeah.
But
we need to share that one of these times. I think that's a valuable experience to share with some of the folks.
Yeah.
That was an interesting. We had a. Well, that was
depends on how long it would take, but go for it. Because a lot of people are going to be moose hunting in boats.
Well,
so it's valuable.
Well, so we were running a creek that's pretty rocky, and we had come through there, and it takes a little skill to get in and out of there, and we had noticed a set of rocks to keep it short and sweet, and gone and done. We'd gone out, done our thing, and we were doing some fishing, and coming out of there kind of groggy. And the worst thing, I never tell my wife when I'm going to be home. It's my birthday.
Yeah, no, it was your birthday.
Oh man,
it was definitely your birthday.
Yep. And I'll actually, we need to post some pictures of this too. I think I'm gonna get this to you, James. Maybe we could do a little reference to the podcast page there.
100%.
It's pretty rowdy, but so Carl and I were coming back out of there, and we got our butts kicked pretty good out there. It was a good day, but we were tired.
Well, and
Or-
sore. Chris had fallen on my anchor
Oh, that's right. Was that the same day?
the morning of, or the night before. I don't remember.
Were we
but-
setting burbot lines and I took a spill on that thing?
No, we were scouting a moose hunting spot, and we were cutting our way in,
Oh, that's right.
and then we decided enough of that.
And I fell off the.
The deck of the boat
Yeah.
onto the anchor.
Yeah,
Oh, man.
that was bad.
Oh.
Yeah,
That was bad.
Yeah, and then we decided that was enough of that, and we went and set up camp, and then got a wild hair and decided we were going to go fishing.
Got the
Mhm.
chainsaw stuck in a log in the middle of the.
The river, hanging
Yep.
over the river, yeah,
Yep.
just suspended.
So yeah, so we were like, we're gonna break this up with some fishing, but we're coming back, and I don't remember what the deal was, but we went back through that section. I was like, hey, this is that area where the rock's at, and we hammered this rock,
Oh, man.
and we kind of did a shakedown, and everything looked good.
And I laid the coals
then-
to it and took off. And I'm like, we're slowing down. We're slowing down.
I'm
we're
like,
slowing
we
down.
got a lot of surface drag going here, Carlito.
And then
What's
I
going
let
on
off.
here?
And then I let off the throttle, and like I
All
don't
this
know,
water
150
past us.
150 gallons of water goes running to the front of the boat.
Oh,
and
no.
I'm like, that's not good. So I just turned to shore and full power up onto the bank as
Mhm.
close as I could. And fortunately,
And we
I-
didn't get very much up onto the bank like we anticipated
No,
either, because
but-
we were
but
bogged
the-
out.
saving grace was I found like the only tree big enough
Really?
where I pulled it up on the bank that was like the only tree big enough to come along to.
Uh-huh.
And so at this point, probably half the boat sunk. I mean, and it's actively sinking, and we're just chucking stuff up onto shore.
Stuff's floating away. Stuff's finding its way out at that point because we had the angle right. So
Yeah.
things were finding their way out of the boat.
Oh, man.
Tackle boxes are floating off, and we're like high grading the most expensive.
And we're
stuff.
not like waitered up or anything. We're like our fishing clothes like drenched in water and in a bad
Jeez.
spot.
Yeah, and I had the game plan that if we weren't back by this time, we were going to have somebody go send the troopers after us, right? Well, now I'm like looking at the clock. I'm like, oh, well, we should probably, let somebody know we're going to be a little late. And,
I didn't know it either. There was a windstorm that had cut all the cellular stuff out. Remember that?
yeah.
You might know something about that, James. So we didn't know it while we were gone, but there was no cell service
Like anywhere.
at all.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then we had no
Was this like-
inReach capability.
Well, yes.
Was this like 2 years ago?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know.
Yep.
I know what you're talking
In
about.
July, right?
Yeah.
And the worst
And
part,
I had my inReach, and we were
I
trying,
had my inReach too.
and we couldn't get any signal.
Yep.
Mm.
And it wasn't like, oh, hey, we're blocked in the mountains. I mean, we're in a creek.
It was like saying failing to send, and
Hmm.
I've had it say where
Hmm.
like it'll give you the little notice that it's still sending. I was like, this thing just said fail to send, and I
Huh.
sent it again. I was like, oh boy. And
And-
the worst part is, I told my wife that I was going to be home at like whatever time.
Right.
My mom was here visiting,
Yeah.
and then I think they had a chat at dinner. Like my wife was like, I haven't heard from him, and my mom's like, well, what do you make of that? She's like, I don't know, something's wrong. She said she knew something was wrong right away.
Well, and like I had said, like whatever, I think it was like 10 o'clock that night. If you haven't heard from me by 10 o'clock that night, send the troopers, here's where we're at, all this stuff. And my buddy knew where we were at. He'd been in there with us before. And so, but now we're like, okay, I mean, and we'll just say it's like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're looking
Mhm.
at it and we're like, okay, we're going to be getting to cell service before that. So we come along the boat up out of well, first we started with a ratchet strap, and we broke the ratchet strap, and we had to come along. And so we got that.
And then we used a ratchet strap to stay stuff off because that's
Yeah.
what we were doing. So every time we'd make some gain on the come along, we'd ratchet strap and tie
Yeah.
it and
Yeah.
tether it off so we didn't lose our gain.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then we got it
And it
up
got-
high enough.
And it got easier the higher we got it because more of the water had drained out or
Yeah.
poured out.
Well, and that's an important detail because a lot of people that might not be familiar with come-alongs, I mean, you can't drag something 50 feet in one fell swoop with a come-along. Like,
No.
there's limited
Yeah, I mean,
length
20
there.
feet maybe.
Yeah.
Carl and I have gotten into enough hairy situations at this point that we were kind of like, yeah, whatever. Like,
Business as usual.
yeah, and it was like, okay, tether it off. So we tether it off, break everything loose, start fresh again with
Yep.
an empty spool. work our way back, and then we ended up patching that hole. And
Yeah, I mean, hammered it out. Another piece of equipment that I don't go anywhere without is an axe, like
Mhm.
a hand axe or a hatchet. I mean,
Yep.
there's the book out there, Hatchet.
yeah,
But
that's right. I straightened it.
Yeah,
I
we
got
we,
under
we
there and
hammered it.
I tapped it with a piece of wood and the hammer side of the axe, like
Mhm.
re-straightened the dent. And then you should mention the aluminum patch.
Yeah.
That stuff's gold.
Yeah, I carry it. It's a 2-part. It's like in a stick, but it's a 2-part aluminum epoxy.
Yep. I've seen it at the boat shop.
You and I have bought it, James.
Yeah.
When we've been out.
Yep.
Yeah, I wonder why.
Yeah.
Scared it right into me.
Yeah.
And put that stuff on there. I don't know. It says it's ready to go immediately, but we're like, oh, we'll give it, because we don't want to do this again.
Right.
We don't want to drag.
Well,
it
and the other thing is what we had to get into.
Yeah.
We were in the mellow part. We
Yeah.
had to get into some rough stuff to get.
Yeah.
Hence why we left a flight plan, because we were kind of already doing like kind of hood rat stuff anyway to start
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
We don't usually tell people what we're up to, but this time around, I want to let someone know where we're going.
Yeah. And so we hammered that back into place, sealed it up, did a little short test drive, make sure no water was pouring in there, and then piled everything back in the boat and went home. And then raced back into cell service. So the troopers weren't coming to meet us somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was like, I think I said 10 o'clock or 11.
We were just past, we were like, for my wife, we were like 15 minutes, we ended up being 15 minutes past our due date.
Yeah.
Because that's, and my wife was like, he's never late.
And
Yeah.
and I think mine was like, or it might have been a little longer than that, because mine was like, we had like 10 minutes before he was calling the troopers.
Right.
And like I remember rolling back into service, and I'm like hitting the button. I'm like pulling over on the side of the road. I'm like, this is too. We don't need search and rescue finding us driving down the highway, right?
Right. But it's good to have those plans in place.
Yeah, and that was
Yeah.
kind of another thing. We had a bunch of lessons there. Make sure you have the tools to self-rescue.
Well, and most people aren't going to carry it. Come along in a boat on an adventure like that. It's why.
That's why.
Yeah, I'll tell
that's
you.
why. Yeah.
You know that aluminum patch stuff. So I got a buddy. They've actually, we're talking like a tear.
Mhm.
So when you get those logs coming up off the
Mhm.
bottom, or like tree limbs, like ate one of those full on,
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
and we're able to stuff that thing back out the floor of the boat and
Yep.
like float away with the boat filling up with
And
water.
Pack that stuff in there.
Well, what they did is they had beer, and they poured all the beer out, took those cans, cut the tops off, cut the bottoms off, and made flat patches out of those beer cans.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that was their saving grace to get out of that situation with that patch.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because they would have never been able to pack that. They didn't have enough of that to patch that. So
Yeah.
they kind of rationed that and made patches out of those beer
Sure.
cans and got out.
That's great.
And
Well-
the guy that I talked to, he said they needed equipment to get that patch out,
Yeah.
to get that dealt with properly, because it was so solid in there.
Well, I mean, mine took a grinder to get that out of that corner.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And that stuff will set underwater too, won't it?
I mean, it says it basically once it's
we did our patch underwater.
more or less.
Yeah,
Did
well,
you? Yeah.
it was still in the water. We never got it all the way out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I've got a friend in Sitka. He's like, hey, bring me some of that. I'm going to keep that on my aluminum boat in case I ever hit a rock or,
Oh yeah.
One thing I will mention about that stuff is to bring that in at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
because it'll
Not let it
if
freeze.
it's like because it'll freeze, it'll separate, and then it's just compromised. It's
Yeah.
not-
Well, and another lesson I've learned is don't leave it in your toolbox with your tools and then take it down a rough, bumpy road. Because otherwise you have a conglomeration of tools.
Yep.
tool statue.
Yeah.
I'll say all coated in hard cast aluminum.
No, that was definitely a wake up call,
Yeah.
to say the least.
But yeah, I mean, have a plan in place. Make sure
Mhm.
somebody knows where you're going to be, all that fun stuff.
I think like that whole thing kind of targeting like new guys that are listeners. You don't rely on your inReach.
Right.
Don't
Yeah,
rely on your line of communication.
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, even in good conditions, Troy coming here bear hunting. He's like, hey, what's up? I'm going to get an inReach. I'm going to bring it. I'm going to activate. I'm like, okay. We're out in my bear bait stand, one of my bear bait stands, and he's like, I'm gonna shoot a message off to my wife. Beautiful, clear,
Now
just
you have
absolutely
stealthy.
awesome day. Yeah, well, and that message,
never.
I think that ended up sending when we got home the next day.
Yeah.
to her, and he was like, he was so shocked at that, not being used to being in this environment. He's like, but it's an inReach, and I'm like, it just doesn't matter. I know that's not.
Well,
I know that's not textbook. And he was like, and then he noticed it throughout the course of the remainder of our trip. He had played with that. He's like, there's a lot of places this thing isn't working. And I was like, well, it is what it is. And he goes, I can't. I mean, he was like, he was almost offended that thing. I told him that thing wasn't going to work. And
satellite communication in Alaska is unreliable, and it's simply because of how far north we are.
Right.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like the Iridium system is very widespread. It does cover a lot of the Earth, but as far north as we are, your angle that you're shooting at that satellite at is so low
on the horizon.
It's not as low as some. Like, I mean, when I was installing DirecTV around town, I mean, I think we were like 5 degrees above the horizon.
Right.
Maximum.
You're pointing it into the mountains out there.
Yeah. Like, I would go to people's houses and be like, I can't install your DirecTV. And they're like, why? I'm like, you live on the wrong side of the hill.
Yeah.
Like, and that's the thing here in Alaska.
Yeah.
Now, the Iridium system is a little bit more widespread, but still it's
a little higher.
It's a little higher. It's a little bit, they have a little bit more of a northern band than, say, DirecTV does, but it's still not great. And there's a lot of areas in the state where it's either unreliable or doesn't work at all. And I've had that experience a lot. And especially when you're going inReach to inReach, where my messages have taken over an hour to send. Yeah. Or even if it shows sent on mine, it can take an hour to be received by the other person.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there wondering why.
The only time I've ever had perfect inReach communication was when we were in a cub at 10,000 feet doing caribou work, and you're messaging.
No obstruction. You just got a clear line.
You just got to clip to the front of the plane.
I literally have it hanging on the superstructure of the.
Do you really?
Yeah. Leave it up there, and then if you flip over, it's right there in your face when you're hanging in your seat. You know? But yeah, no, that's. Yeah, I mean it's.
Yeah, all of the pilots that I've flown with, they clip them right to the little handlebar right there, right underneath the windshield.
Yeah, I mean the cross brace on the back seat.
Yeah, like that's Carl and I. We run small boats for a reason. And you're space limited, you're weight limited, and it's not practical to just like. At the end of the day, you're not just and you and I have done some adventures now, James. We've done we've done some silly stuff, and you can't bring the shop with you. In a lot of these small, it's not like we're running, 20-foot Woolridges. We're running these tiny little utilitarian boats with small jets, and you can't go nuts. But there's some things that are important to have. Even us getting that. I remember even us getting your boat because this we got the patch fixed, and everything was good, and we're like, okay. Then wrestling your boat to get it offshore back in the water. We fought the heck out of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it took everything we had.
Yeah. I mean, I think we ended up just rolling the bow around and pushing it out and then scoot the back end all the way.
Because we worked it for a minute at one point, we had entertained the idea of me walking across the creek with rope
and pulling
and hooking to something on the other side of the creek
and
now.
then sitting in the boat and come along.
To pull the boat around. Yep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you have to have like a couple little outro plans there.
Yeah.
Well, and some creativity on the fly too is the other thing there.
But
I like what you said about the bringing stuff though. I mean, rarely I would say on a moose hunt are you trying to be as lightweight as say a sheep hunt, right? Like you're not typically trying to backpack 10, 20 miles back into some steep
still
terrain.
Bringing herbs and spices and butter and for that bourbon, that occasional bourbon.
Exactly. But the thing is, it's like you are going to find yourself in some weight limitations, whether it be small boats, whether it be drop-offs and super cubs, whether it be, whatever those situations are going to be. You can't bring everything and the kitchen sink. But I would say if you can afford it, big tools for a big animal is a plus. I like that you put in there the hatchets earlier.
Yeah.
I have a Gerber hatchet. It's just a regular black one, and it is the most bomb-proof hatchet I've ever had. Like, it's $34 at Sportsman's, and it has survived everything I can throw at it. I've had that thing chopping into rocks and dirt and, like, digging holes with it, and I use it for breaking sternums open and, like, all kinds of stuff, and, like, it just has never failed me. I love
it's something like
so
when
much.
I can And I've had buddies. They're like, dude, what's that for? I will bring a cordless Sawzall with a demo blade, a fresh demo blade. If I can afford bringing that.
Yeah.
And I've had guys look at me like I'm out of my mind till we're breaking ribs down, or you're trying to pop a joint and it's cold or whatever. And I mean, and you can really trim some stuff up with a Sawzall, with a cordless Sawzall.
Oh,
you
yes,
carry
you
a
can.
couple extra batteries, and that gets into other things too, firewood. And I mean, that's a handy dandy little tool.
Cutting your
and
trail.
sometimes
cut and trail.
And you go, well, okay, chainsaw. And we usually have a chainsaw too when we're getting silly, but it's loud.
Yep.
And when you're trying to be a little more discreet, a Sawzall is awesome.
And a chainsaw on a fleshy bean, like, you don't want to do that.
Well, no,
Been there,
and
done that.
I should clarify what
Got the t-shirt.
What I was more alluding
threw the t-shirt away.
Yeah. What I was more alluding to is like using that multi-purpose wise. So say you get one guy in the group that drops a moose, and you guys still got another tag to fill, and you've been seeing moose, and you drop that moose in a rough spot. You gotta limb some stuff out, cut some stuff out of the way, some small stuff.
Yes,
it's a lot better than cranking off a chainsaw and making a bunch of racket.
Especially if that's the area, you're planning to hunt like the next day or two.
And I do that like a lot too. I'll do that with like kind of late season stuff if I'm bear baiting. And that's all kind of off topic, but instead of hauling a chainsaw into a bear bait station or a handsaw, if I'm like, man, all this stuff's popping up, I'll take a Sawzall in. Because I mean, if that's all I'm hauling in, that and a little stank, throw that thing in there and trim some stuff up, and you're not.
I love a pair of loppers for that stuff, like all that fresh green that pops up there.
Yeah,
a pair of loppers is perfect. But another reason I bring up the thing with the not using a chainsaw on a fleshy bean is because I was taking apart a moose with a buddy one time. It was years and years ago, and he thought it was going to be a slick idea to quickly get through the sternum. He said, "Oh, hold on a second!" Just threw stuff everywhere, dude. Don't try it. Don't do it. It's it's quick, but it's not.
I had
good.
a buddy that had one, and I think that's kind of old school. Like dudes running vegetable oil and different stuff, but dude, there was bone fragments and all kinds of. I like went home. I'm washing meat off, and I'm trying. You're like, dude, trying to keep this dry, and then I gotta wash it now and re-dry it, and I don't think that was the best.
No, it's not good.
Sawzall's good though.
Sawzall's fine. Yeah,
dude, I've done several. You don't have that big aggressive blade, especially places where like. I've had places where you got to bring like rib meat. You got to retain your rib meat and all that. You just buck that up and.
Yep. Well, that's even my wife went and helped a friend do some ribs last season, and that's what they used a Sawzall, and they cut those ribs into little one dinner pieces. Like that's exactly Sawzall, and just right through the bones, right through the meat, everything, and it was just perfectly clean.
Hey, remember those loppers too work great too. Like remember when you're doing beavers?
Yep.
You just snip those legs off with the limbers. You're ready to go.
Yeah. Well, like we use a Sawzall for doing all the pigs. I mean, we'll probably butcher. I bet on average we butcher about 20 pigs a year, and we'll take it and run it all the way down the spine. Make your two halves. Make it easier to portable, especially if we're selling half a pig to somebody and half a pig to somebody else. But I mean, Sawzalls are good for that. I actually like the hand shears. Like for lemon, and I use them for doing ducks, for cutting the breastbone out. Like when I was guiding, we would have to leave a wing on, and so you basically pull the breast meat and then cut around one side, leave one wing attached, and just skin it out and leave the wing on the breast meat.
Is that to identify?
Yeah.
Do you have to do that with waterfowl? Like with
in the field? Yeah, if you're going to break them down in the field.
Okay.
So that you can, make sure you're not shooting.
That's good to know. I didn't know that.
10 whatever, that you're only allowed one, or because you can get the species and sex off of the wing, and you can even tell whether it's a juvenile or a.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what those big loppers are that you're talking about, James. Like, are they like the same one I have?
Like I don't know what brand mine are, but they might even be like the DeWalt hand tool.
Is that
version,
that same style that I have that we use for the beavers?
Yeah, it just has the extension arms, and you can just crank those
Dude,
things
something
out.
that's kind of cool about that too is like if you're doing cranes, if you get home with your cranes is like, because you're trying to roll them around and the legs are getting caught on stuff and there's claws, is cut those legs off with those loppers. And then you can kind of, you know, I mean,
I usually disarticulate everything at the joints on those anyway. But
yeah,
I mean, it's pretty easy on a crane. There's not much meat on the leg to get in your way.
Well, no, I'm talking about just lopping them to roll them around.
Yeah. No, that's what we ended up doing last year. Yeah. Yep. Just lopping them right at the base of the feathers. Yep. Get them out of there. You're not going to eat those parts. So.
No. You know, like one of the, I guess, kind of back to the gear a little bit. One of the things that, generally speaking, like utility stuff, it has to have multiple uses.
Sure.
For me to throw it in or keep it, with the exception of some things that there's no duplicate for it or there's no substitute, like a come along, right? I mean, you might be able to to rig up something, but at the end of the day, you're still probably need that leverage.
Yep.
But you know, like the axe, I can use it as a hammer. I mean, I usually keep it sharp enough I can cut rope with it without like cutting. I can just run a piece of rope over it and it'll cut it. So, and then, you know, hammer, obviously the axe, splitting an animal open, all of those things, and kind of, you know, especially if you're weight limited or space limited, making utility out of your tools, you know.
Yep.
That's a big one. You know, and one thing that I tell everybody, especially for moose hunting, because from my experience, it's always in the dark hours that you're dealing with this thing, is make sure you have a headlamp and extra batteries. Because inevitably you're going to be halfway through and this thing, your batteries are going to die or start getting dim. That's when you're going to cut yourself. That's when you're going to have other issues.
Absolutely.
Extra batteries they're cheap insurance.
Yes. Yeah, I like multiple headlamps.
You know what else I'm into also is I bought them this spring. Is you get these they're like the hanging LEDs. You can get them from like Century.
Yep.
And they're like $3. Yep. Those things are so bright. They have such a high lumen output.
Yep.
And you can hang those things, but they're tiny too. They got magnets on them. And
yep.
We bought them. I think you and I got some in a GIF for stern lights.
Yeah.
But they work freaking awesome for all kinds of stuff. But
well, and that's good for lighting up the general area. And then you've just got your headlamp for the immediate area you're working in. Yeah. But you still have that kind of ambient light around you so that you set your knife down over here to grab a different knife and you're cutting through here. You know, it's not like it's off in the black somewhere. It's like right there. It might be a little more dim, but you know where it's at, you know.
Something else too, if you have that weight, if you have the ability to hold that weight too, is like a job site standalone LED that runs off like your rechargeable like Milwaukee batteries. Those things are sweet for like,
and that's the thing,
site or whatever.
And that's the thing where like moose hunting gets a little bit, you know, with what gear to bring, it gets a little bit. Well, it depends on your situation, right? Because are you flying in somewhere where you have the weight limitations of a Super Cub, or are you on a 22-foot boat versus a 12-foot boat, or are you wheelering in versus taking a side by side or an Argo where you can, you know, haul a huge camp with you? Like, I mean, there's so many different things, but you know, for me, with an animal that big, I like bringing as much gear as I can on whatever, whether it's a plane, whether it's a boat, whether it's a wheeler.
Well, I mean, think about like you and I last year in my boat, right? I mean, we probably could have put 300 pounds of meat in the bow of that boat and gotten away with it.
We might have had to make trips.
That was my plan also was like, cool, shed some weight, you know, dump our whatever gear and get the meat out because meat out first, right?
Yep.
And come back for the rest of it. So,
but yeah, just whatever your limitations are. I mean, bring as much as you can within your limitations. You know, and I've done fly out moose hunts. I've done wheeler moose hunts. I've done just truck moose hunts. You know, like
and
every single one of those has a different gear list.
The other thing I would say that's unique to moose hunting over caribou, sheep, deer, you can think of it, is having a heavy duty external frame pack.
Yes.
Versus, an internal frame pack, they're better for uphills and downhills and all that kind of stuff. But for putting just sheer weight on there,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to beat a good external frame pack. And you've got lash points, you've got places to secure it.
Yes.
I mean, you heard the story about the Alice frame pack. It just sits up too high. Most pack frames are going to let you move that weight down a little lower.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I've got the Alps right now that I carry with me, and that thing does good, but it could use some improvements. But
I've sold on the Barneys.
the Barneys is good.
Those are
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
I rock one of those old school, like the Slumberjack, and that thing is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see them a lot. I don't really see a lot of guys use them, but they got really a lot of padding, and
Mm-hmm.
I use the heck out of that thing.
I've got another one that I carry around sometimes. And I don't even know who makes it. It's the only problem is I've had enough weight in it that where the shoulder straps attached to the frame, it's stripped that out.
Oh yeah.
I had leather put on it, and then it ripped through that, and the grommets, and I've tried a bunch of different stuff trying to get it, but
Yeah. The thing I like about the Alps one I have is its large frame.
yeah,
So I can put a quarter on there and it doesn't overtake the entire frame. And I'm a large framed guy,
Yeah.
So like for me, that's not a bad deal. I've got my wife one of those the Kelties.
Mhm.
And
I was
it's
just gonna mention that they got a nice plethora of those, just kind of like a good stock of those. That's one of
Yeah.
their more common ones.
yep. And it's always done good.
They're amazing.
And hers is a little bit smaller frame than what my Alps is, but I mean it's sturdy, dude. It is so sturdy.
I
love
those.
But
yeah. I mean, but that's kind of the one thing that's different is you need a good pack frame. I mean, because you might be able to take a sled, you might be able to take all of this other stuff.
Yeah.
But at some point, and we were talking about ways to move meat. One of probably the most creative thing I've seen is in swamps is guys using stretchers, like Vietnam style,
really,
stretchers,
to throw that in the toolbox.
and just one guy on each end carrying it, and you're
Mhm.
spreading the weight out between two people, and they just put it on their shoulders and just
Yep.
walk. And I always thought that get one made up that was a little different, like mesh and not heavy duty canvas and some stuff like
Mhm.
that. I mean, if you can get a cot that'll hold a average sized person or like any of that, you could get lighter weight, get some aluminum poles that'll hold that, and
Yeah.
you could get something collapsible and make it small.
Spread the weight out between you and a buddy.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like when you're making the reference of like just having the pack versus the sled or whatever. I remember when we shot that bear up on the hill,
Mm-hmm.
and we got down to that big like fallen timber field, and remember I had to fish through that. Well, an otter sled wouldn't have been real advantageous for
Mhm.
50% of that
Right.
rock, right? And
Right.
so that's where a frame pack would come in handy, and you could kind of pop that frame pack off and throw it up on a couple pieces of timber
Yeah.
and weasel through that and
It's
shift it to the next section or hand it off
Well,
to a
It's
guy.
unfortunate that it was in the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where you'll notice, like, with what I do on almost any hunt. I mean, barring, well, no, even the bear bait, I do this. I don't carry like a nice backpack. Like when you and I went moose hunting on the boat trip last year, like I have my dry bag and then I have my pack frame, and I just put my dry bag on my pack frame, and that's how I roll. And then if I have to offload the dry bag, then it's everything I have is in a dry bag. It's fine. I can offload that wherever I need to, but I've got that full pack frame there. And that's especially with moose, I do that on. I'll do that with caribou too, especially if I'm on the wheeler or something like that. But there's just a lot of those situations with those bigger animals where you don't want to be, separating your main pack and relying on any of those systems to haul that big a meat out. I mean, when you're talking about a quarter that can weigh, 80 pounds plus, that's something you really want to keep in mind, is having a nice steady pack.
Yeah.
Do you having that dry bag too? I think that's good. Like, I like those dry bags. They're like those big tube dry bags that don't have straps on them.
Mm-hmm.
They might have like a briefcase strap on it somewhere, like a soft or a handle.
I think mine has like a shoulder sling on it, and that's
Yeah.
about it. And, and that's on carabiners. I can just take that off if I want to.
And like the cool thing about that is, and I've used mine too to pack like caribou and stuff, is you dump your gear on the ground in that dry bag, and then you can leave it there. And I don't advise getting those in camo
No. Or black.
It depends on what you're
Or brown.
using them for, but like something that you can see. But
Mine's yellow.
Yeah, and I love
Yeah.
that, and I'll just leave them behind,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're
That's your.
making the point of getting your meat out first,
Yep.
which is the law, and you can go back, and even if it's, say you get nightfall or something, and you're like, well, I'm pretty smoked, cool, and you don't need anything out of that bag, leave that bag there till the morning and
Exactly.
go on a walk after breakfast or whatever. But
Especially if all that is just your day stuff, you know,
Yeah.
and you've got your food back at camp, you've got your cooking stuff back at camp. You're not stressing it, you know. It's not your survival
Exactly.
gear in that bag,
What-
you know.
What's the one thing
It
you
can-
don't leave behind?
you're gone.
There you go.
Yeah. Either of them.
Yeah.
Because you will walk back in from coffee at the boat with your pistol only,
Mm-hmm.
with a bear staring at you.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
That's me and a buddy of ours that
Yeah.
he's like, you're not going to bring your rifle? No. What are you doing? I'm going to go out to the boat and snack and have some caffeine. I'm going to go with you. I'm going to leave my rifle up here too.
Yep.
Walk back in and we're sneaking past a bear that's not real happy that we're there
Yep.
with pistols. Like we're clearing a house.
Yep. I keep my rifle on me pretty much all the time.
That bear did almost get it. And
So,
almost
and
got the dome.
I wanted to touch on that. Chris has said that a couple times about making sure the meat comes out first. I think he's referring to making sure that the last thing to come out is the antlers. If you were doing that,
The trophy.
the trophy
yeah.
aspect of it, but
Yep.
the meat and that goes if you were shuttling meat in packs and loads.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you know, if you were running quarters and then stopping and doing that, you just don't ever want those antlers to get ahead of the meat.
Exactly.
Is kind of what he's getting at. Just
Well,
to
and, like,
clarify that.
I think
Yep.
a good way to kind of habituate that too is if you have your small gear, your loadout, you know, last. Usually, the rack's the last thing to come with all that
Yeah.
stuff too.
Mhm.
It's, you know,
Yeah,
Yep.
but I mean, just clarifying what we're talking about in terms of
legality wise.
yeah, making sure that it's not
Yeah.
ahead of the meat.
And that's like
Because if you get back to camp with your first run, and let's say you grabbed the burger bag and a rib rack and the head,
right.
and you get to camp and there's a trooper sitting there waiting for
You're
you
in
to check
violation.
you,
Yep.
and you're like, oh no, I'm turning right around and going back for the quarters. It doesn't matter.
right.
Like,
Right.
you know, you're in trouble already.
Was
So-
it Mike Condis that had talked about it on here? Like he said that I think he was talking about a buddy of his or something that you could see the meat from where they decided to sleep
Yes. Yeah.
and they got cited.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Out there in Caribou country.
Because they
Yep.
had, I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is sketchy too. Because, I mean, if you think about it, I guess it all depends on the trooper you're dealing with. But you know, some guys don't want to sleep. I know we shot 2 caribou one time, and we literally set tents up like right on them.
Mhm.
I mean, and
protect what's yours.
and I'm like, I'm not. My buddy's like, you think this is a good idea? I was like, I'm not giving these things up. And he was like, you know, this just goes against all the fundamental rules. And I was like, well, whatever. Like, you can put your tent over there. I'm sleeping on this stuff.
Hey, you know what? If you got bear tags left and they're in season, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know about a night shoot for bears though. That doesn't sound like all that much fun.
No.
Can I mention one more thing about the dry bags while we're at it?
Yeah.
So something that I've gotten into lately, and this is sort of off topic, but it's a convenience thing. If you're running a dry bag for just whatever, not a pack out, but I'm starting to really like the duffel bag style dry bags
Mhm.
because you don't have to dump everything out. I think you've seen the one that I was running. I found it. Someone dumped it. I
you
don't
got
know
a
why.
steal on that thing, dude.
Dude, yeah, I was like dumping some scraps from work, and this freaking duffel bag sitting on the ground. It's a waterproof like a dry bag duffel bag, and it's kind of one of the like rectangular style.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's cool. You can I've got the tent in there, 3 tarps in there, mountain house, my cook kit, my sleep pad. I mean, just an unbelievable amount of crap in there.
Yeah.
And then just like a ton of headspace in that thing. You could put more stuff in there.
Well-
but it's cool because I don't have to dump that whole thing out to get to one thing.
Well, and you saw the one I was running when we were moose hunting last year. I had my big, tall 90-liter yellow bag,
Mhm.
and then I had my smaller one, which was the duffel style.
Yeah.
And that's what I kept a lot of my clothing in and stuff like that. Because that's the thing, when you got those tube style 90-liter ones, like you don't want to be reaching one arm in and feeling for your socks and feeling for this, like, and then you end up dumping it all out in the tent because you're upset and
So,
like, you know.
I got a couple things. So when I got like the super ultralight, like the ultrasil thin ones,
Oh yeah.
and I got different. I mean, they're like every size is a different color,
Mm-hmm.
and so I can be like, okay, socks are in the orange one.
Oh, you're talking about the little ones.
Yeah.
That you can, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and then to go with that, the other thing is if I'm buying a dry bag, the number one thing I look for is that it has a white lining or a light lining, so you can actually see in it.
Get some light
It's
transmission
not,
in there.
It's not like staring into a cave when you go to look in there and you need a headlamp in the middle of the day to see what's
Right.
in your dry bag.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like if I'm going and buying a dry bag, that's one thing that
That's true.
I would look for.
And the lighter color ones typically tend to be a little bit more
yeah.
light transmitting than like the black ones or even the camo ones, which you don't want to buy anyways, because when you lean those up against a tree or a bush, they're hard to see when you come back. But
Yeah.
One thing I like about that duffel bag style one too is it perfectly fits on the front of my 4-wheeler.
yes,
Mhm.
that's
And
why I
it is
translate
just
them
like,
too.
and it's cool. You can, and I have it kind of set up. It'd be a lot to explain. I don't really lash it down. I basically use 550 card and 2 carabiners, and I clip it in so I can still access the top without unstrapping
Oh,
it.
yeah.
It's just absolutely awesome.
Yep.
But you need something out of there, you unzip it, and it's like easy peasy.
You grab
It's-
the one thing you need, you zip it back up, and it's good to roll.
Yep, and I think
Yep.
that's the way I'm gonna. As far as if I have the convenience of lugging something like that around, I'm just gonna do it that way from now on.
For boat and wheeler, you can't beat that.
No.
Honestly, that's the way to go.
And I just
But-
can't believe you can fit camp in that one I got.
Yep.
It's insane.
Yeah, that thing's nice, dude.
I mean, that's a one bag.
that's why we go
like
to
if-
the transfer site, man.
Dude,
That's
if Carl calls me or you call me, I'm like, hey, pack your stuff. It's like, okay, I just pick that bag up.
yeah, right.
I mean, that's my go bag, and I got ammo in there. I mean, that thing is unreal. Food, my silverware.
yep.
It's got like the little top flap on the top. I put a pan in there one day. I was like, this thing's so sweet. I want to figure out where to buy another one of those.
Yep. But no, all good things to consider when you're out moose hunting. So
Yeah, and like I guess one thing I would say about for flying, is it's nice to have a big bag to put everything in, like big backpack, whatever. But if you're going to do a fly out hunt, pack a bunch of small bags.
yes,
And then that way they can squirrel those around in the
for
airplane.
organization.
Just to get it all in there. And then once you get on the ground, you can throw it all back in your backpack or whatever.
Yep.
But if you're planning a fly out hunt, a bunch of small bags is good because if your bag, your pack frame, whatever, however you got it packed is all, it doesn't fit the airplane perfectly.
Mhm.
You're going to be carrying it in your lap or, whatever. And, it's a lot easier to have a bunch of small bags.
A buddy of mine and I, we were flying to go hunt, and he's like, that same thing, big bag. He's got a
Mhm.
little old cub. He's like, we can't put that in here like that. So we had to like break it apart, throw in boots. But same thing you're saying, like a puzzle,
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
And then I had to put all that back together. I'm like, and then he's kind of like you're saying, he had everything compartmentalized, like you're talking, and little stuff. And then he just dumped everything on the ground and threw it all in there. I'm like, well, dude.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I guess that's kind of for anybody thinking about doing a fly out hunt. That would be the one thing is, yeah, I mean, it's great to save some weight by having it all. And I mean, even if it's heavy duty Ziploc bags for like drink mixes or whatever, like rather than loose in a pocket or something like that and trying to get it all fit in there, have it all compartmentalized and
Yep.
it'll make things a lot simpler when you
Yeah.
show up.
And for anybody that's never flown in a Super Cub, there ain't a lot of room in those things.
No.
Don't
So-
freak out when the pilot straps your rifle to one of the wings.
Right. I mean, think about like a regular commercial airline flight and then cut that distance in half
Yeah.
that you've got in your seat. And that's what you got to work with. It doesn't recline. There's no in-flight service.
Nope.
It's hard to get back there. You're shadowing the pilot.
You don't have to worry about smoking in the lavatory because there is no lavatory. So-
Yeah. But yeah,
But-
just some some thoughts, random, I guess, but
Perfect. All right, folks. Well, this one ran a little bit long and the season's getting short, so we're going to split it up into 2 episodes for you. Part 2 will drop next Monday. I believe that is September 2nd, and we're going to be breaking down everything regarding calling moose later in the season when the rut gets heavy. So definitely keep an ear out for that. If you enjoyed what you heard today, go ahead and give us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to us on. 5 stars is always best, and a written review goes a long ways in helping people find the show and understand what they're going to hear. If you think somebody could use the information in this episode, go ahead and hit that share button. There's one next to every episode on every app. And if you follow our social media, if you search at The Northern Hunter on either Facebook or Instagram, you can share any of our posts, any of our stories. Really helps us grow this show. We don't do any kind of paid marketing or anything like that. If you would like to check out our partners page on the website, go to thenorthernhunter.com. We have a list of companies there that have been gracious enough to believe in what we're doing, and they'd love to help us out, and they love to help you guys out too. It's a lot of great outdoor gear with discount codes with most of them, so go check those links and codes out. We also have the shop page with a bunch of merch, hats, hoodies, t-shirts, all the good stuff. And remember, if you have any questions whatsoever, you can always hit the contact button on the homepage of our website or reach out to either one of the social medias I mentioned earlier. We always respond as fast as we can, and if we don't know the answer, we'll get you to the person who does. Thank you again for listening. Hang in for part 2 coming out next Monday, and until then, get out there, get after it, and good luck. We'll see you there.